Hey everyone, my name is Chris Blankenhorn. I am the Illinois Green Party Secretary, um, and I'm here today to talk about the eco-socialist Green New Deal. You know, I'm gonna dive pretty deep into the specifics of the policy. I'll touch a little bit on the Democrats' versions, the numerous different policy proposals that have come out of the Democratic Party. But I'm not going to get too deep into them besides, just some comparisons mainly. Start off, like I said, my name is Chris Blankenhorn. I'm the Illinois Green Party Secretary. I was the Hawkins Walker 2020 social media and tech director. I'm a formal national co-chair for the Green Party, and outside of politics, I am a Montessori preschool educator. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is basically 2 years of, me doing social media work for the Howie Hawkins campaign. And one thing that I think was really, really great about Howie's Green New Deal, he's one of the first people in the country to run on it in 2010. And then when he ran for president in 2020, he did something that the Green Party hadn't done before with its Green New Deal, and that's put out a fully fleshed out, balanced budget for the Green New Deal, outlining what policies we would like to implement and how much they would cost, and then offsetting those costs different ways, which we'll get into. So I think it was a really, really important, step for the Green Party to take this, idea of a Green New Deal, which has been co-opted by the Democrats now, and put out a budget that shows this is not just some crazy idea. This is completely doable with today's resources and today's technology, right? So that's why I think Howie's eco-socialist Green New Deal in 2020 was a huge, huge step forward. A little history, like I said, Howie was one of the first people in 2010 to run on a Green New Deal in the United States. He was running for governor. Rich Whitney in Illinois also ran on a Green New Deal for governor. There were dozens, I think over 100 Greens across the country ran on a common Green New Deal platform in the United States. And that was the first time that, this policy had entered the mainstream political, arena. And so it started in the Green Party. And then in 2018, it was championed by AOC. It became part of the Democratic Party debate. It's been picked up by Democratic, front groups like Sunrise, the Democratic Socialists of America. And so now it's really become a big part of the mainstream conversation, right? But what we're going to talk about today is about why we need a real Green New Deal, why we need an eco-socialist Green New Deal, and why that word eco-socialist is an important part of it. So, the Democrats, like I said, they have their Green New Deal. I'm going to move through a lot of stuff because it is a hefty, $4.2 trillion a year budget with a lot of different areas of operation. So I'm going to move through a lot of stuff, but as we get to the end, I'll also hope to take some questions. So like I said, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the Democrats' Green New Deal. We're going to focus way more on ours, but it was just reintroduced, I believe last week by AOC and Senator Markey. And as Howie's always said, they took the brand and diluted the content. It's a non-binding resolution. And when it came up for a vote in the Senate, all the Democrats voted present except for those who voted against it. It never came up for a vote in the House in the last session, but it's been reintroduced. The reintroduced version is basically a carbon copy. There's some date differences. There's probably some slight modifications, but it's largely the same bill we saw in the last Congress. When it comes to the Green New Deals of the Democrats, Bernie by far had the best one when he was running for president, but that's not what's on the table right now. The Democrats' Green New Deal, it still leaves fracking on the table. It still leaves new pipeline infrastructure on the table. It doesn't have a full stop to fossil fuel infrastructure. It doesn't phase out nuclear. It doesn't demilitarize, which, our military is one of the largest polluters in the world. So, while there's some good things in the Democrats' Green New Deal, it's not what we need. It's not the steps that we need to take to get to avert climate catastrophe. It also extends the deadline to net zero, emissions to 2050 versus 2030, which is what the science in our eco-socialist Green New Deal calls for. So that just came back out, but it's a non-binding resolution. So, even when they do put it on the table, it's not something concrete. Something is concrete that just came out is the American Jobs Plan, which Biden kind of implanted a little bit of climate stuff in along with it. It's an infrastructure plan, right? But some of these infrastructure changes will impact the climate, so they're also kind of claiming some credit for that. It's $2.75 trillion over 8 years, compared to the Thrive Act, which is the Progressive Dems climate bill, that is $10 trillion over 10 years. But none of these numbers are really based on anything that's real or rooted in science or rooted in need. These are just a number is picked and policies are pushed on it. Bernie's proposal during the presidential campaign was $16 trillion over 10 years, and it would have gotten us to clean power production by 2030, but not other sectors. So with the American Jobs Act, they put out a 1,200-word fact sheet, released by the administration. It hardly mentions the climate crisis and doesn't lay out any kind of timelines. Climate's just kind of an afterthought. So which we see these bills out of the Democratic Party. But I mean, it's too late for gradualism, right? We blew past the 350 parts per million goal in 1988. Earlier this month, the readings that we got in Hawaii were 421 parts per million. So we don't have time for gradualism. These plans coming out of the Democratic Party are things that would have been good, would have been okay suggestions a few decades ago, but we're well past that. So what do we need is we need an eco-socialist Green New Deal. And that's what we're going to talk about today, primarily centered around Howie Hawkins' proposal in his Green New Deal budget. One important thing about the eco-socialist Green New Deal is that it's a federal program, but is largely guided in many ways by local needs. We've got community control put in there across the board, and it allows us to build, us to address these issues based on what is needed, and then set the budget based on that need, as opposed to getting an arbitrary budget, which is what happens now, and doing what you can with it. So the eco-socialist Green New Deal is was the central policy platform policy of the Hawkins-Walker campaign. It would deliver us 100% clean, renewable energy in all sectors by 2030. So not just power production, which is a big part, but also manufacturing, agriculture, transportation, homes and buildings. Eco-socialist Green New Deal would create 38 million jobs. And it is comprised of two major policy pieces: the Green Economy Reconstruction Plan, which is the program that gets us to 100% clean energy in all sectors, and then the Economic Bill of Rights, which carries on FDR and MLK's promise of a second Bill of Rights. And we'll get into the specifics of those in a little bit. But to start out, we'll start from the top with the Green Energy Reconstruction Plan. The Green Energy Reconstruction Plan, like I said, is what gets us to the 100% renewable energy production in all sectors, right? So for power, it gets us there with the interstate renewable energy system. We've got green buildings and homes for all. We've got transportation reconstruction. We've got food and environmental reconstruction. And we've got manufacturing and construction, right? Each of these 5 sectors contributes a large part to our overall emissions. So they all need to be dealt with, right? Big picture on the eco-socialist Green New Deal, it's $41.7 trillion over 10 years. 27.5 trillion of that is this green energy reconstruction plan. So it's about 60% goes into the actual climate action. For an important thing, I think, when we're talking about these big numbers, for every dollar we invest in green energy, retrofitting, rails, that kind of thing, every $1 million, 17 jobs are created, as compared to for every $1 million we invest in fossil fuels or nuclear, the old type, the dirty technology, 5 jobs are created. And jobs in this plan are actually kind of the bottleneck, right? 38 million jobs is a lot of jobs, and that is the area that we may have problems filling, is actually getting all the jobs filled to do this work. So to start off, you start off with power, the interstate renewable energy system. 100, like I said, 100% renewable energy production by 2030. This is accomplished through a combination of a wind farm network, a national network of wind farms, localized solar and geothermal, and a smart grid, that connects them. So you've got, as much as possible, local need, especially local, residential and small commercial need, being met by solar panels and geothermal in our homes and in our communities. And then we support that on a larger scale with a national grid that is connected through wind farms. So that provides us with a lot of local autonomy, but a strong backbone to back up the grid with that wind power. And then another key part of this is utility and gas buyouts, right? When you look at the Democrats' Green New Deal, it's all about public subsidies, tax breaks, things like that encourage private business to make these transitions. Exxon has no interest in moving away from oil and paying them to do so. So we need to be socializing these systems. That means the federal government needs to be buying out the gas industries, the private utility companies, and bringing them under local community control. And you can do that by buying up shares. During the wildfires, when I can't remember the name of the acronym of the power company out there, but I did a little quick math, and to buy 51% of it and gain control would have cost, I want to say, around $1 billion, which is not an unreasonable amount of money to buy a very large utilities company and bring it under public control, acting in public interest instead of for profit, which is a large contributing factor to what was causing the fires, the lack of maintenance and things like that. So through this system, we can get the 28% of our emissions that are related to power production. We can get them zeroed out, 100% clean, renewable by 2030. It'll cost about $510 billion a year. When you compare that to the Democrats' power standards, they're pushing clean energy standards, which include nukes. It includes coal and natural gas, as long as you're capturing the carbon. It has no public ownership of production, and it's really just setting standards for the private sector. So it's not fundamentally changing how we produce power in this country. It's got $35 billion for climate research, but that includes carbon capture and advanced nuclear, investing in dirty energy, pretending we're going to make dirty energies clean. And then it's also, the Democrats also, they get us net zero by 2035 in all sectors by 2050. But they play around with the word net zero in that they have it set up and they have it worded in a way that you can plant a tree or 1 million trees to offset your emissions. And that's fine, but the problem is we need those trees to be pulling current carbon out of the atmosphere. We don't need them to be used as a bargaining tool and a balancing act that corporations play to meet these new clean energy standards, right? We need all of the reforestation and the afforestation and the habitat restoration and the soil reconstruction that we're doing to be pulling carbon that is in the atmosphere, because we're at 421. We're well past the 350 line that was drawn a long time ago. So we need to be drawing that 421 back down into the soil through these things. We don't need to be wasting these trees, this reforestation, this habitat restoration on balancing off the continued use of dirty energy. So that's power. Next up, we got housing. Again, public ownership is central. This is the eco-socialist Green New Deal. We're going to build 25 million public housing units that will cover the estimated about 8 to 9 million people who are who have unaffordable housing. That will also cover the homeless population, which has grown during COVID. And you know, when we're talking about public housing, we're talking about mixed income social housing, like you see in Europe, where you have low income housing in the same building with professional middle income housing and even upper middle class housing. So we'll build 25 million units of public housing to help solve the housing crisis, guarantee housing for all, and have universal federal rent control. Doing this also allows us to start restructuring how we live, right? We can build these in walkable communities where residents can get access to all the service they need within walking distance. We can start connecting to transit better and designing these communities around access to public transit and regional transit and then the national transit. But we'll get to that when we get to the transportation section. There's big money in green retrofitting of homes and big jobs as well in the green. That's 2.4 million jobs in the green retrofitting of homes. In the Biden, and then you've got, like I said before, local geothermal and local solar. Getting all houses with heat pumps and hooked up to geothermal, getting local solar where we need it can really help reduce the 9% of our emissions that are represented by housing, while we're also solving a housing crisis, right? While we're also solving an affordability crisis in our housing market. And we're doing this through public housing by really investing in mixed income public housing. You compare, this is $650 billion a year to pull this off. You compare that to Biden's $213 billion over 8 years, so way less. It's going to build 2 million affordable housing units, or 2 million retrofitted buildings, 1 million new housing units, 500,000 new homes. There's 120 million buildings in the United States right now. So at 2 million over 8 years, it's going to take us half a millennia at that rate, right? So even though, yeah, that's great, we're retrofitting 2 million homes, it's nowhere near what needs to be done, and it's not even real, a real attempt to solve the problem when you crunch the numbers. They put together, in the Biden American Jobs Act, they've got $40 billion to improve public housing. New York City public housing alone needs $68 billion in the next few years for capital improvements in their public housing, right? So they're just these numbers are just not anything that's gonna, it's great, it'll help, but it's not anything near what we need. So when we talk about the Green Housing for All plan and the 25 million, it's not only solving that housing crisis, it's also a desegregation program, right? Because we're getting incomes mixing, and housing is a main source of segregation in this country. So it can start addressing that issue as well. Next up is transportation. Transportation is the biggest emitter, is the biggest sector that emits at 29%, just above power production. And the key to transportation is getting us off fossil fuels. I want to say 98% of transportation power is fossil fuels. So it's a huge problem that we have to overcome. It needs to be overcome a couple ways. One of them is heavy investment in public transit, from improving our local public transit to regional public transit to an interstate high-speed rail system. Public transit is an essential way to get to deal with the emissions that are coming from transportation. So we've got the high-speed rail that'll create 2 million jobs, creating that network. We've got regional public transit, which is another 2 million jobs. We've got electric vehicle subsidies, because there will still be a need for some people to have, private vehicles. There'll still be a need for, vehicles to be other than public transit to be on the roads at times. So, that subsidies get that transitioned over from internal combustion will create another 2 million jobs. And then we've got pretty much everywhere in the country. You can point out all of the litany of examples of the infrastructure work that we need to do. So there's also, a heavy infrastructure reconstruction program that'll create 800,000 jobs, right? So we're 6 million jobs just in transportation because we've got to completely rework how we're doing this system. Like I said, 98% of the power that comes from goes into the transportation system is oil and gas. So we've really got to address that. The Biden plan is $621 billion over 8 years compared to our $6.8 trillion over 10 years. Biden has, roads and bridges and electric vehicle subsidies. Largely, it's big subsidies to private corporations, right? He has they're going to turn 50,000 buses and 20% of school buses into electric buses. That's out of 1 million buses in this country, though. $50,000 is just kind of, it's lip service to the problem. It's not actually addressing it. They've got an $85 billion budget in there for public transit, which is nothing for a national plan. Again, New York City alone needs $51 billion by 2021 for its capital budget. They have $80 billion for Amtrak and freight rails. I can tell you from conversations that I have had with people about, high-speed rail, $80 billion is going to build you Chicago to St. Louis. And that's it, right? So these aren't serious. The Biden plan on transportation isn't a serious push to change how we do transportation. It's like most of the plan, heavy subsidies for private corporations, pushing them towards cleaner energy standards. Next up, we've got agriculture, environmental reconstruction. This is a key part, right? Our agriculture system is poisoning our environment. And when our environment collapses, our agriculture systems and our ability to feed ourselves is going to collapse. So while it's only 11% of total emissions, addressing this problem is a really, really important one. In this section of our eco-socialist Green New Deal, we've got regenerative agriculture, completely changing how we do agriculture. Right now, we have an industrialized, chemicalized agriculture system. A cycle of cash crops. I live in central Illinois. I'm surrounded by corn and soybeans. We consume almost none of the corn and soybeans that I see in fields around me. It gets turned into ethanol. It gets turned into corn syrup. It gets turned into soy-based products. It gets turned into animal feed. Most of it doesn't go directly into our food system, right? That's not what our farmers are farming for. So we've got to completely redo how we do that. And the problem with our chemicalized and industrialized agriculture is it's destroying our soil. And soil is a key component to capturing carbon, right? We need to be pulling carbon out of the air, which is what plants do, and sequestering it in the soil. And that means when we harvest, we need to be leaving the roots and things to stay in the soil rather than just pulling them all up like we do and letting them, that stops the sequestration. We pull them out of the ground. Another key part of the agriculture and environmental reconstruction is the rebirth of the Civilian Conservation Corps. This will be 4 million jobs, and it'll be globally. It won't just be a job that you do in the United States. They will deal with habitat restoration, reforestation, afforestation, which is where you put trees somewhere where there weren't originally trees. But it's all about building up sustainable and balanced ecosystems, because sustainable and balanced ecosystems will draw carbon out of the air and help us pull back, right? Because like I said, we're well past that 350. We need to not only do we need to stop, we need to get back. We need to pull back to, where we need to be. And to do that, we need to actually have negative emissions, where we're actually pulling out more carbon from the air than we're putting in. And a key part to doing that naturally is reforestation, afforestation, habitat reconstruction. This section also covers water infrastructure. From Flint to, I know there's been a lot of problems that Greens have been working with in New Jersey. All over the country, we've got problems with our water infrastructure with lead. So there's money in our eco-socialist Green New Deal to address that. And then the final part is, I've talked a lot about natural sequestration, but there may be a need for artificial sequestration of carbon as well, in order to pull back down to that 350. In Iceland, they have a project going where they're able to basically make carbonated water with carbon dioxide, inject it into porous basalt rock, and then it solidifies in the ground and becomes carbon in the ground. Just as a it's just in there, and that's where it can be stored. This isn't right now. These things are all kind of in trial phases, but as we go forward, we're going to need to definitely be looking at some of these kind of things and how we can do them. And then the last sector for the green economy reconstruction program is the manufacturing sector, right? What is left of a manufacturing sector in the United States? And that's part of it. We need to rebuild our manufacturing sector. We need to be doing the work to not only bring it back, but bring back green manufacturing. How we talked a lot about Green New Deal factories in every congressional district, right? Throughout downstate Illinois, where I live, many communities have been devastated by the end of manufacturing in the United States. We don't have tool and dies anymore, and those are the factories that make the machines for other factories. We don't do any of that stuff domestically anymore. And when we bring it back, we need to bring it back in a way that is really zero waste, as close to zero waste as possible. And we can get that means designing products that will last a long time without needing to, none of this. We need a new iPhone every single year. None of this, my iPhone's breaking because it's a year old. We need to be designing products that are low waste, designing products that are, long lifespan and that are highly recyclable. Zero waste recycling is another part of that. When you look at the society we live in today, there's really no reason that we couldn't have almost zero consumer level, garbage waste now. With biodegradable, recyclable packaging, things like that, we could really, community composting, all that kind of stuff. We could really have almost no consumer level waste headed into the garbage dump. We don't have, that's completely within our technological and economic abilities right now, but we don't have it, and it's largely economics. It's profits. So we need to bring all that back and start, this is key to us, to our economies becoming as much as possible, locally self-sustained. What your Green New Deal factory is going to be making is going to largely depend on what your region needs in terms of, its productivity and what it does and what it produces. So that's a huge part of it. And the same thing goes for the rest of the world. A global Green New Deal is a really essential part of this. We're consuming global, the United States is way over consuming our share of global resources, largely coming from the global south. And we have an ecological debt to the rest of the world. We have a responsibility to invest in rebuilding ecosystems and, providing them the technology to, become regionally self-sufficient as possible with zero waste manufacturing. And beyond the factories, there's things we need to address in how we do business, how we make things. Cement is a huge percentage of emissions. The making of cement releases a huge amount of emissions, but there are ways to make it that it doesn't. That's not the problem. That's not a problem. So we need to change how we build things, what kind of cements we use. We need to change how we make steel. We need to move away from coke ovens to electric arc furnaces, and the industry is already doing this for economic reasons, right? But we need to be pushing this even further. And when we rebuild these industries, we need to be rebuilding them under public ownership, right? So your Green New Deal factory is owned by the workers. Your Green New Deal factory is controlled by the local community. And it's an essential part of changing the power structure, of changing how power in this country is distributed. So, that's the overall green economy reconstruction program. Like I said, it is $27.5 trillion over 10 years, and it creates about 30 million jobs. The other half of the policy piece is the Economic Bill of Rights. The Economic Bill of Rights, like I said, goes back to FDR's promise of pushing for a second Bill of Rights that protected our economic rights. MLK, also championed this as well, and it's been championed by many other groups. It's part of the AOC Markey Green New Deal as well. It's one of the good things that they did keep was some semblance of an economic Bill of Rights. In our eco-socialist Green New Deal, the economic Bill of Rights is a job guarantee, an income guarantee, homes for all, Medicare for all is a national health service, and we'll talk a little bit more about why that's specific in a minute. Lifelong public education and a secure retirement, right? So it's meeting the economic needs as basic human rights. The jobs guarantee will create 5 million jobs, or will provide 5 million jobs. Holly likes to talk about instead of going to the unemployment office, people can go to the employment office and get a living wage job provided to them. Out of these Green New Deal programs, whether it be the Green New Deal factory in their district, working with their local CCC, any number of options. There's plenty of work to be done, and like we said, the jobs is a likely bottleneck in this plan. In addition to the job guarantee, there's an income guarantee. Everyone has a guaranteed income above poverty. That became a popular discussion point in the 2020 election with Andrew Yang proposing a universal basic income. Howie preferred a negative income tax, which rather than paying everyone a set amount every so often, would be based on your income. So everyone who made under 200% of the poverty level would receive monthly checks that would raise them up to that level. So there are multiple ways of doing that. There are things laid out in the eco-socialist Green New Deal budget that are policy suggestions, and there's multiple ways we can look at it, multiple things we can try to find to fill in these gaps and to make these programs work. But how we always advocated for the negative income tax instead of UBI, but no matter what, it's an income guarantee that everyone has a guaranteed income above poverty. Next up is homes for all. We already covered most of that. 25 million public housing units, universal rent control, and really reworking how we build our cities and towns. National health service. Medicare for all is the big calling card right now. The thing that people talk about, the big slogan right now. What we advocated for during the campaign was Medicare for all as a national health service. So immediately through the Medicare expansion of Medicare system, everyone is insured. All residents of the United States are insured. Our concern though is that if you just address the insurance industry, which is certainly one of the most malicious industries out there and needs addressed, but if you just address them, the new Medicare system, and it has to be an improved Medicare for all, right? We need to improve upon what we have. We need to provide full coverage for all necessary for all necessary treatment. And when we do that, if we don't address private ownership in other areas of the healthcare system, what we're going to do is create a feeding trough for private providers, for medical manufacturers, for big pharma. They can just start, even possibly even worse than we're already seeing now, just keep cranking up prices, because now there's just one person that pays, and it's a universal system. So we advocate for a national health service with public ownership of providers, medical manufacturers, pharmaceutical companies within 10 years, through buyouts, and those would be put under community control, where local communities would have community health boards that were represented by the communities and the workers in the providers, in the local providers. So not only would when we give that local control, we allow local communities then to expand their service, right? So we can fill gaps where people can't get the healthcare services they need. I live in the medical district for my region. There's 2 hospitals within 4 blocks of each other, and there's no reason for them to be next to each other, and they compete viciously with each other for customers. Why are they both located right here in the medical district? It would be much better to spread their services out and provide services to other parts of town that don't have it. So by putting in local power, that we can start to achieve that. The next thing was education, lifelong public education. That means rebuilding schools, and building new schools, universal childcare, public pre-K, free higher education, and the interstate high-speed internet system. We definitely, 2 things that COVID has definitely taught us is the need for universal childcare, and the need for equitable access to high-speed internet. I heard a candidate, Franka Mueller-Paz, on one of our streams, talked about digital redlining in Baltimore, and that was about the access to high-speed internet there, and the push that they had on Comcast that they won to make sure that all students had access to high-speed internet during COVID, right? So access to high-speed internet really is a new redlining battle. It's a modern redlining battle that we need to address. Often inner cities and rural communities are left out. And then similarly with COVID, it really kind of pulled into perspective, how much our school system is essentially serving as a daycare center. And we need universal childcare so that people that need to work aren't having to pay outrageous prices for childcare. And that goes into public pre-K, and once you're into the public pre-K, you've got free education in the public system all the way up through higher education. The last part of the Economic Bill of Rights is secure retirement for all. We started by just simply doubling Social Security benefits. That's the fastest and easiest way to ensure that there's a secure retirement. These would be policies that ideally, how we always advocated, these actually be constitutionally enshrined, so that they weren't subject to overturning should reactionaries come back into power. So, that was a huge, 35-minute dump into a $41 trillion 10-year budget, and I threw out a lot of big numbers. $41 trillion it's a number that we can't actually understand. It's so large that most people, you can have a concept of what it is, but we don't have a concept of actually how much money that is. So the question that always comes when we talk about this is, okay, well, how do you pay for it? And that was the great thing about what Howie did with this budget, was that he laid out a balanced budget that achieved all of this, that all the programs I'm talking about are paid for or accounted for. And so how do you pay for it? We can get couple trillion on progressive tax reform. And that can be more progressive income tax brackets, corporate income taxes, land value tax, a wealth tax, an estate tax, financial transactions tax, which we talk about a lot in Illinois as the LaSalle Street tax, where financial transactions are taxed a small rate per transaction, and it brings in billions of dollars. We really need the LaSalle Street tax in Illinois, especially since voters rejected a progressive income tax. And then, we can also do things like ecological taxes that are taxes based on the ecological output of industries and things like that. We can get another, little over $1 trillion through public banking, quantitative easing, and spending. And so when we do that, what we can do is, this is in some ways a little bit of modern monetary theory. We can print money if we want to. We got to be careful about things like inflation. When we do that, we can also do quantitative easing, which is when the government would essentially borrow money and then pay interest back on it to cover the costs of the programs. That's not ideal, but the reality is paying for it now is a lot cheaper than paying for dealing with the crises that are going to come if we don't. And then the next one is spending cuts. My slide's a little messed up, but spending cuts, we can save about $800 billion a year just from spending cuts. That can include 75%, we called for a 75% cut to military spending, ending the war on drugs, abolishing ICE, redirecting funds. We won't need some of the programs that we have anymore because they'll be absorbed into the new economic Bill of Rights programs or into the new green economic recovery programs. And then the last one is sale of public goods and services. Howie's budget has that as an unknown. And the big reason is, we don't. So as we start having public ownership of power production companies, right? There will be rates that are paid by citizens to, have access to the power. So that'll be income. It will vary heavily depending on where we're at and what level of production we've reached with the public system. The same goes for public manufacturing, publicly owned factories, things like that, mass transit fees, public housing rents, other service fees. These will all bring in money that can be used to balance that budget. So, what we're talking about is not, isn't something that's impossible. It's something that's entirely possible within the resources that we have today. It's entirely possible that we could do all of this within the current resources we have today. It's not an economic or a resource problem. It's a political problem, right? And the essential political problem, of this is the Democratic Party, right? The Republicans are never there. We know they're never going to, they're not going to be there for us on this. But the Democratic Party spends a lot of time sucking up energy that could or should be used to, fight for a real Green New Deal into, incrementalist solutions that, would have been too little too late decades ago. So, the key here for us, and how do we win a Green New Deal, is independent organizing, right? And people can start asking questions if they have questions. I'm about to wrap up the normal or the presentation part, but you can just put them in the chat and I'll see them. But we have to organize and build an independent political power in this country. We have to, organize a political power that's independent of the capitalist class, that's independent of the influence of donors, that's independent of the influence of corporate special interests. And to do that, we have to organize outside of the main two parties, right? We have two political parties that are dead set on fighting each other on who's the real pro-corporate party, right? And we need to do that. You know, this is all couched in a climate catastrophe, but COVID has really exacerbated our the economic catastrophe that we're facing as well, the economic inequality that we're facing, and a real eco-socialist Green New Deal not only addresses the climate issue, but it pulls us up economically. It's a desegregation program, it's a jobs program, it's a housing program, it's Medicare for seniors, it's lifetime education, it's restoring the planet, it's changing the way we build things, right? So we can't rely on the existing power structure that is reliant upon the funding of these dirty industries, of these polluting sectors. We have to build it on our own. It's hard work, but it's what we have to do if we're going to succeed. So does anyone have any questions? I'm going to drop some links as well, but you can ask a question in the chat if you have any. So you can, I just did a really fast data dump of, all of this information. You can read about it, in depth at hawkins20.us/EGND, Eco-Socialist Green New Deal. There you'll see the budget layouts. You'll get into how many jobs are created by each sector, each policy, how much money each policy will cost per year, citations, narratives about why we're advocating what we're advocating, for all these different things that we talked about. So at hawkins20.EGND, you can read more about that. At hawkins20.us/EBOR for Economic Bill of Rights, you can get more into the Economic Bill of Rights, and what our proposals were on that. And then you heard me talking, referencing quite a bit the American Jobs Plan, which is the infrastructure with climate nestled in program that the Biden administration just dropped out. It's $2 trillion over 8 years. But Howie responded in length, about 35-40 minutes, to the American Jobs Plan on a recent live stream. And you can see that the link that I just added. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Like I said, I dumped a lot of data, a lot of information right in the last 50 minutes. You can read more about it at the links. You can join the Illinois Green Party. Go to ilgp.org/membership. Help us build towards a Green New Deal in Illinois. We can talk about what a Green New Deal looks like on the local level, right? What does it look like for Illinois? What is our specific manifestation of the Green New Deal? What programs do we like? I talked about, we have the LaSalle Street tax that we push already, and that could fill the role of financial transaction tax. But get involved with the Illinois Green Party, ilgp.org. You can learn more about us. You can read about our policies. You can donate. You can become a member. Get connected with locals near you. Also, make sure on Tuesday nights you're checking out Howie Hawkins live stream. It's every Tuesday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central. It streams on the Howie Hawkins Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube pages, as well as Angela Walker's pages. And every week, Howie and Angela have their live stream. Angela hasn't been there as much lately because she's working long days, but they have guests. They had a great guest talking about police brutality last week. Next week, they're going to be talking about the anti-nuclear movement. So make sure you check those out. Make sure you share those. And we'll keep on putting out content like this. So thank you very much. Like I said, ilgp.org to get involved, and have a good night.